So I'm just getting my my slides to go. Andrew, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi everyone, I'm Andrew. I work with V at Blueprintx ANZ. I am a MCE certified MarTech consultant there. I've worked across a number of accounts like Uber Eats, Preco, Hanson, etc. And my big sort of passion in terms of Marketo is all about utilizing Marketo to the fullest. So when optimal, trying to get it as automated as possible. And I really do like the emphasis of clean and reliable data, as it's so important.
Awesome. For those of you who haven't met me, my name's Veronica. I am an MTSA and MCE and head of Blueprintx ANZ here in Victoria. I am currently sitting in the lockdown zone in Melbourne, but hi to everybody, both here and overseas. I know we have people from all over logged in today. So we're going to get started. So just a little bit about Blueprintx. So we are a platinum Adobe solution partner, and we have offices all over the world now. So our crew today sits here in our Sydney and Melbourne office, but we do have crew pretty much all over the world, and Marketo is our passion. So the group works across strategic consulting, across execution support, across operations, and across business adoption. So why forgotten functions? So we have been, over the last few months, going through our favorite Marketo features and telling you why we love these things. And some of these things are things you might not have known about. Some of these things are things you might have forgotten existed. But as always, we like to focus on demos. We like to focus on real life, and we like to focus on fun. So let's unlock what we want to talk about today. And I am going to kick off today with the advanced email A/B testing. And the reason I've specified email here is because I'm not going to go into landing pages today. That's sort of a subject for another day. But we're gonna really sort of deep dive into A/B testing today. But first, let's bust some myths. So I've got my 3 favorite testing and or email myths on the next slide. So let's see how many of these prevalent myths that you've heard before, or you may have even repeated at some point. So you should always send emails at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I love this one. This is one of my favorites. And if she ever sees this, my good pal Courtney Grimes in the US actually told me that this myth actually originated from an email service provider way back, sort of more than a decade ago, who put this into an article, and it just took off. But as with all things to do with your audience, the answer is it depends. It is not always the case that you should send emails at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sending more emails leads to higher unsubscribe rates. Again, if you are sending targeted, relevant content to your database, it's really going to be a case of testing the load to see how much your database can handle before they start to go into unsubscribes. If you're hounding someone every day, 5 days a week, five days a week with completely irrelevant content, 5 minutes after they have subscribed to hear from you, then yeah, you're probably going to see a higher unsub rate. So it's really around how you evolve your sending strategy. And we're going to talk a little bit about how testing plays into that. And this is a shout out to my friend Grace in New Zealand, who popped in that one of the biggest myths that she knows is that testing occasionally is better than no testing at all. This one's really interesting, because I have always been a big proponent of you should test as often as you are able to. But I totally get the point here that actually, if you only test occasionally, it can sometimes be dangerous. If you don't have a full testing regime going on in your marketing, you may actually end up starting to rely on data that you get from occasional testing, which may actually be more dangerous than having no data at all, because relying on the results of one test or two tests can actually be inhibiting for you. You could actually be making decisions based on data that's just not that you got, but just isn't broad enough to draw conclusions from. So I think that that's actually another big myth, that I could just test one email and I know which type of subject line works better or which time of the day works better. It really is about bringing a whole testing strategy into play. So what is A/B testing? For me, A/B testing is not about the technology. A/B testing is about taking a hypothesis, building a test around it, and testing two groups of respondents against that single hypothesis, and then seeing who wins. Rinse and repeat. So so if you don't have that hypothesis, you can't build a test. So one of the reasons why some people are like, oh, we're going to build an A/B test, and they'll get to the front screen of the Marketo A/B testing, and they'll be like, oh, what type of test do we want to run? If you've made that first click without thinking about what test you actually want to run, you're ahead of yourself. So bringing that hypothesis in, what do I actually want to test? That's immensely important for a strong A/B testing strategy. So before we start to hop into actual examples, the rules of A/B testing, and I put in Marketo, but most of the time these are the rules across the board, regardless of what tool you are using. Number one, test one thing at a time. If you are testing two different versions of an email with different subject lines, different calls to action in them, with lots of different content that's changing depending on their location, like, how do you know which one of those things was the actual thing that caused the test to succeed? How do you know it won? So really testing one thing each time. I'm going to test the subject line, or I'm testing the time of day, or I'm testing the whole email. I'm testing long versus short email. I'm testing calls to action. You really need to look at that one thing in that test. The next test you run, you could test something else. So test often, and don't rely on the results of a single test. It's really key here. Don't think that I've sent once and this one, so therefore this is my rule for the rest of emailing forever. It's really dangerous to sort of take that mindset. Test using a statistically significant sample size. Try saying that 10 times fast. I'm going to keep saying statistically significant, so let's see how many times I screw it up. But a statistically significant sample size, if you are sending an email to 100 people and you test a 10% sample size, that means you're sending 50% to 5 people. So if one person opens it, your sample changes by 20%. Like your result changes by 20%. So think about your statistically significant sample. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is. Avoid unreliable winner criteria or vague criteria you can't define. You need to know who wins, and you need to tell Marketo what you think is the winner. And an example might be controversial. I don't think that open rates should ever be used as a winner criteria, because A, I don't care about it enough to put it in my reporting, so why would I assume that that was important enough to win an A/B test? And B, open rates are immensely difficult to get right, because especially in Marketo, if somebody doesn't load images when they open an email, then that's not considered an open. So you have to really think about really specific criteria that you can define and avoid vagaries. And this could be sort of feature X doesn't go with feature Y all over Marketo. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. A/B testing and dynamic content introduces a problem for point 1. So if you've got A/B testing and dynamic content running in the same email, you don't know what was the cause of the win. You don't know if it was the personalization. You don't know if it was the subject line test. You don't know if it was the time of day. So this is really about personalization and dynamic content is one way of improving deliverability. A/B testing is another way of improving it. So you should use one, but not both. So let's look at a little bit of A/B testing in email. So I'm going to assume that you know what email program A/B testing looks like. So I'm not going to go step by step through what that looks like, and there's lots of videos out there. I want to talk about a couple of things that people don't use that much in email program A/B testing. So let's dive over into our first example, which is the date time test. So when you are doing A/B testing in Marketo, you get to choose what type of test you are doing. So I'm just going to load this one that I've kind of pre-built. The number of times most people who do testing or A/B testing in the email program choose subject line. And that's great. Subject line is a very important thing to test. It's a very easy thing to test. but there are 4 different test types: subject line, whole email, from address, and date time. I wanted to specifically look at date time because that really speaks to the fundamentals of A, using things you might not necessarily use all the time, but B, really look at that whole 10 a.m. on a Tuesday thing. So when we start to break it down, if you look at the test that I've got running here, there's a few things I want to point out about it. So I'm using date time, which means that I could send an email at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. on the same day. So what I'm trying to test here is do my audience respond better in the morning or the afternoon? Now, date time tests they're a little bit different to the other types of tests, whereas in a subject line test, you might be going, okay, cool, I am going to set my sample size at 25%, and then I'll send A and B to those 25%. Marketo will pick a winner and then send the rest to the other 75%. Date time tests don't really work well like that, because if you only send to 25%, Marketo will give you a report back, but then you've only sent to 25% of your database. There's no automatic send to the rest of the winner, because it doesn't really work like that for date time. So what I always tell people to do is to set your test sample size a reasonable way up. I'm going to set it to 100%. Set your winner criteria. So the open, click, whatever, I'm going to stick to clicks, go back. Push this to 100%. So that the date time test is basically going 50% receive it at 10 a.m. and 50% receive it at 3 p.m. and there is no winner sent. So and I can look at the reports afterwards to see which one was better or which one won on a whole bunch of different criteria: opens, clicks, whatever it is that I want to look at. So when I go to next on this, you'll notice that the winner criteria is now not available, because when you set sample size to 100%, that goes away. But this date time test will send just one to the other, and I will start to get the answer to that Tuesday at 10 a.m. question. So I can finish that up and close that out, and I'm actually just sending everything at once. It's not a 20% is going to be sent first and then another 80% sent later. It's just going to go boom, 50-50 down the line, 10 a.m., 3 p.m. So the date time test is a really awesome one to bring into your repertoire. The other one I wanted to show people was the custom conversion. I don't know why, but this one doesn't get used a lot either. So people always like, okay, should it be open? Should it be clicks? How do I want to choose my winner criteria? Let's just say that I've got all of this set up as my subject line test. So my awesome subject line, my even more awesome subject line, I've decided to send 20% of my database, remembering that statistically significant sample size. If I was sending to 20% of my database, I would want this list to be at least 1,000 people strong. If I was doing this, if it was only 500, I'd be more inclined to move towards 50%. So that the number of people that you are sending to is significant enough to make a choice between. That's what statistically significant means. So if I move on to the next one, you can see here that I've got a lot of different options here. I can go opens, clicks, click to open, engagement score. But this one here is what I wanted to look at, custom conversion. So in the end, what you want is for somebody to fulfill your call to action. That's the whole point of sending them an email. And the custom conversion is a great way of running an A/B test, because it takes them all the way to conversion. You kind of go, okay, I want to see if a subject line test can influence my conversion. If it can't, like if I run heaps of these and I'm getting the same conversion rates either way, it obviously means that the subject line itself is not playing a role in whether someone actually comes in and interacts with my email, which in itself is a good thing to know. So if I edit this, you can see that I've set up a custom conversion criteria that looks at fills out form. So that could be my call to action. It could be any trigger in Marketo here, by the way. So the custom conversion is basically just listening for that action, and that's what's determining the winner. I do find that if you use custom conversion as your winner criteria, you should give people more time. You should give people a lot more time to actually respond to the test. So if you are working through your strategy, you go, okay, cool. I might not make it one day. I might actually give them 2 days instead to actually bring in enough results if I'm going all the way to the conversion. So just a few things to start to think about when you're talking about using A/B testing in email programs. So we got any questions hanging around, Andrew, that have come up?
We had one from Samantha Myers, but it got answered during the rest of the presentation. So
okay, awesome. So when you are thinking about what you want to do, think about those types of things. Now, next one I want to talk about is the poor cousin of the A/B test, which is the champion challenger. So you may have heard of champion challenger, you may not, but just remember that champion challenger is A/B testing just like you would in email programs, except on triggered email. So we're talking autoresponders from websites, we're talking engagement engine, nurture emails, we're talking autoresponders in events. Anything that is triggered, any email that is triggered can be running an A/B test on those emails. So I want to have a really quick look at Champion Challenger just in terms of introducing something, I guess, maybe something new to your tool set. The Champion Challenger email or the Champion Challenger test is set up on the asset itself. So when you go to an asset and you right click it, so if I go to one of these, for instance, you right click an asset, just falling off the bottom of the screen, but right at the bottom, there is a test option. It really is falling right to the bottom of the screen here, which is a pain in the neck. So just go here. So once you launch a Champion Challenger test, it looks a lot like an email program test, right? Biggest difference being that there's no such thing as a date time test in a Champion Challenger environment, because it's redundant. These are triggered, so there's no time when these are delivered. They get delivered whenever somebody requests them or whenever they hit that point in the cast. So I'm going to stick to subject line here, but you can do whole email and from address type tests. Think about Champion Challenger as when you're doing your distribution, and you'll notice it's distribution, not sample size. So the whole idea here is, in this particular scenario, if I was to send 10 triggered emails, 80% of them would receive the champion version, which is this is an awesome subject line, and the other 20%. So in 10 emails, 8 would receive the champion and 2 would receive the challenger. So and all it's doing here is changing out the subject line to see if that improves the ability to get a conversion. All of the same kind of champion criteria here, champion criteria being winner criteria. So you can do open, click to open engagement, and that custom conversion that I just talked about. The difference being here is that you get Marketo, much like in the engagement program interface. So you'll see this looks a lot like the cadence. So basically you get Marketo to send you a report every week or every 2 weeks or every month, however long you want this test to go for, at a particular time. So let's just say at the end of every week on Friday at 4:30 p.m., I'm going to get Marketo to email me a report telling me which version is winning up until now. So if the champion continues to win, I might just continue on. If the challenger is starting to take over, I might decide to stop the test after a certain period of time, change the champion to the challenger to being the champion, and then that is the email that will start getting sent out as part of the trigger, as part of the nurture program, and you can put in a new challenger in its place. So you can only run one test at a time. Again, testing one criteria on an asset at any particular time. But think about Champion Challenger in terms of, especially when you have website form fill outs, right? So I've got demand generation, people coming through, and that first autoresponder is my first chance to communicate with someone, other than the thank you page. Don't get me started on that. But that autoresponder is my first chance to actually give them information that they have asked for as part of this, as part of that journey of becoming a new lead. And most of the time, those autoresponders say things like, a salesperson will be in touch with you shortly. Like, that is just your real, it's your chance. It's your chance to really personalize that content and really test what content works as a first touch piece of content. And I think Champion Challenger is incredibly powerful when it comes to that. So thinking about Champion Challenger, think about your nurture and how you build your nurture. Champion Challenger will only work if nurture emails are actually in the stream. It won't work if you use programs in nurture streams. It's only if you use the email directly in the stream. All right, the last thing I wanted to throw at you guys is random sample in the control group. No, that's not a name for a bad Marketo cover band. It is a feature that I believe is criminally underused in the Marketo environment. So basically, the difference between something like an A/B test in an email program where you basically go, okay, I'm going to 50-50 the group. It's always random in that particular email. Let's just say you wanted to build like a whole testing strategy based around having one group that isn't impacted versus another group that is, so that you can prove that the changes you are making on a larger scale over multiple campaigns are working. So you can think about pushing people into a control group and think about pushing people into a test group and keeping them separate throughout multiple campaign journeys. So let's just say that we've got a new lead nurture. So I get a new lead into my instance. Do they get a single autoresponder, which is what most people do, or do I put them into a 5-email onboarding nurture before passing them to sales? Which is going to produce more qualified leads? It's a very simplistic example, but how I would do that depends on how I sort that list to start with. You all know how to trigger an autoresponder. You all know how to push someone into a 5-email onboarding nurture. But this is a step that you can do in front of that to decide which path they might go down. So let's think about, in terms of our default program here, let's think about random sample. So random sample is something that's used in Marketo to create random sampling for pushing someone into a list, for sending them an email. Basically just grabs a random section of your list and sends them X instead of Y. So I'm just using lead as created here. It's a very simplistic example, but let's look at my add to list here. What I would do is set up 2 static lists. One is the control group and one is the test group. And at that point of them coming into the system, they get pushed into that control and test static list. And that static list is then used as the audience for future, for pushing people into the nurture or getting the autoresponder. Just sort of a 2-phase process. And you see here, this add to list, there's an option here called if random sample is 20. This is saying if random sample is 20%. So I'm taking 20% of all the people who come in to my group, and I will admit to you, it's not truly random, especially in a triggered environment. It's more like if it's 20%, it's more like 1 goes to random, then the next 4 go to test, and then 1 goes to random, next 4 go to test. Like, it's not truly random, but in the end, you will end up with 20-80. Thereabouts in terms of percent in your control and your test group. And this process could push people into 2 static lists, which I would then use added to list triggers to add to engagement, or added to list triggers to add to an autoresponder, or I could just use batch. So I could go, okay, cool, find me all the people who've been added to the normal test list over the past 24 hours and add them to engagement. So it's really how you want to do that. But in essence, it's all about using this random sample in a way that allows you to to create and keep a controlled environment for testing purposes. Cool. I don't know if there's any questions that have popped up, Andrew, but I'll just continue on up to the back end. So we've had a look at a few different A/B testing type things that you can think about. So think about your custom conversion criteria, think about only testing one thing, think about how you can bring that champion challenger type of functionality into your nurtures and into your autoresponders. Think about how you can test date time and what's the best time of day to actually send someone an email, and think about control groups. So do you want to build a control group strategy so that you are doing a longer term testing strategy? And I wanted to point out this book. It's by my good friend Vince Warnock. And he's written a book called Chasing the Insights. And this is a really practical, awesome guide to building a long-term testing strategy. And in the end, his key advice is fail fast, which is key advice you get on a lot of things. But test, see if something's working. If it's not, move on to the next thing. And really kind of staying agile and staying curious about how different things that you might do might impact your results. I think it's a really great way to think about your marketing. And it certainly plays against that whole set and forget kind of attitude that some people have about marketing automation, because you've got to constantly keep on it. But I think it gives you an incredibly powerful way of approaching audiences differently. So now I'm going to have a bit of a look to see if there's any sort of questions that have popped up. Oh, no, don't have any questions. If you get any questions over time, over the next sort of 20 minutes or so while Andrew's speaking, let me know, or we might have a little bit of time at the end. But for now, I am going to pass across to Andrew.
Thanks, V. So I'm going to be talking through bounce management today. And I wanted to start with a little poll. And this is to do with how, or if you guys are using bounce management in your system. Now, you should have a little pop-up right now with do you have a bounce management system in your instance? And we'll just give that a few seconds to get sort of voted up.
I really like that one. Yeah. No, but I really want one. I think everybody should want one.
We'll give it a minute to get all that in. And I will share my screen in the meantime. Okay, so most of us have voted now, and we can see that a lot of people want one. Some are unsure what bounce management is, and some have one, but they could be improved. So let's sort of go into, I'm actually going to end the poll first, and let's go into.
You might want to go into present mode, Andrew.
Bounce management. Whoops, cancel that.
Top right.
There you go. Bounce management, okay. So before we get into the what, so what is bounce management, I wanted to discuss sort of why we have bounce management. What is the purpose of bounce management? Now, there are a few big reasons for this. Now, the most important one is to do with your sender reputation. Now, sender reputation can sustain damage if you do not have one of these processes set up in your instance. Now, this is all based around the perception that spam filters have around you and your IP. And this perception is based heavily on your behavior as an emailer. So consistently sending to bounced addresses deteriorates this reputation. And this will ultimately result in you ending up in a spam folder, or it will drive your bounce rates higher and sort of begin a vicious cycle of sending emails to bouncers, more bouncers, bounce, bounce, bounce. The second point, which is sort of causal to point number one, deliverability rates can drop if bounce management is not managed. And this is to do with this concept of list hygiene. Now, list hygiene impacts your email's ability to be delivered and pass through spam filters. And to sort of define that, list hygiene is the process of maintaining a high quality and engaged list. So it's something that should be regularly updated, reviewed, to ensure the right people are receiving the right emails. So ensuring this is as high quality as it can be is sort of vital to proving that you're a good email citizen and actually getting past those filters. I mean, and nowadays, getting past spam filters isn't about having one bad keyword in an email. It's more so a point system, a score. And each ISP has got a different threshold. A few key contributors can be SPF and DQ not being set up, too many images, and list hygiene plays a big role in that as well. The third point, and probably one of my favorite points in here, as in my bio, I sort of said I love reliable data. Having a bounce management strategy set up can act as a really solid vehicle for quality and updated person data. If you have a series of lists that are being generated progressively that show you people that have bounced due to invalid email addresses, and that's being consistently reviewed, that is a way that you can continuously look at your data and say, okay, why has this person bounced? Okay, he's moved company, let's look into that. We get a new email address. And you update that in your system, and it continuously happens, and you just keep on getting your data updated, and it remains at a high quality. The example for this one is Andrew is a prospect, Andrew hard bounces, Andrew is placed on a Marketo list. The sales owner sees that I'm on that list because of a weekly review, a bounce management protocol. That sales owner then calls Andrew, confirms my new email address, and then I receive a marketing email and become a customer, whatever it may be. Point number 4, it can assist with database size management should you be approaching your threshold. Now, this one's more to do with exactly that, the database, if you're getting to your threshold for that, if you have these lists set up and you have people that are, chronic bouncers and they're not being emailed to, there's something wrong with them, you've already got a really good starting point for this task. And it can be a tremendous task if you haven't got anything set up, trying to figure out who should be removed from the system to make sure you maintain that data threshold. And you've already got justification for why those people should be removed. So it can be really helpful with that. And the 5th and final sort of point on this one is, should you end up on a blacklist, a bounce management program is really useful for the remediation process. Now, for those that don't know, if you land on a blacklist, you need to work with Marketo Deliverability, the support team, and if your problem is really bad, you get placed in the doghouse. And having a bounce management process set up and evidence of you having some kind of list hygiene protocols, it can be a really good first step in getting yourself off those lists. Now, on the flip side, if you wanted to get onto a trusted IP, and a trusted IP is essentially a Marketo pod of people that have as good a deliverability as you. If you have really solid deliverability, you have to actually have a proven proactive list hygiene strategy and bounce management strategy. Now, why would you want to get on a trusted IP? To actually purchase a dedicated IP, you need to be sending out, I think it's 100,000 emails a month. And if you don't qualify for that, a trusted IP is the next best thing if you want to up your deliverability and make sure it's at optimal performance. But you will need proactive and proven strategies to show. And if you do want to go in that avenue, you have to contact Marketo support. So that's sort of the why of why is bounce management important and essential to Marketo instances. So now let's sort of go through the what. Now, a bounce is essentially any email that is rejected by a recipient's mail server. It essentially means that the email has not been delivered, and it comes in 2 types. There's a hard bounce, which is delivery inhibited due to a permanent failure, and a soft bounce being a temporary failure. Now, these bounces have their own associated categories, and these categories give us a better idea of what caused an email to bounce. So for a hard bounce, we've got a category 1, which is relating to the email being marked as spam by the recipient mail server. So it's sort of saying, we don't want to receive emails from you. And it's sort of one of the worst kinds of bounces. A category 2 is an email bounce due to an email address that is invalid or doesn't exist. Now, this is really common when someone goes to a form fill out, and they're rushing, they type something in, they misspell their email address, or if they actually change, they move businesses maybe, whatever it may be. But those are the 2 hard bounce categories. Have you got any questions so far, V?
No, you're good. You can keep going.
The soft bounce categories include a category 3, which is caused by full mailboxes, timeouts, or throttling. And for those that don't know what throttling is, it's essentially the associated mailbox provider is limiting the amount of emails that they accept from a particular sender. So one point to make here is if you are sending out a lot of emails to one company and you have these kind of issues, maybe try and hit key stakeholders in that business or space them out more. A category 4 is caused by technical problems. These are usually technical issues on that end. So it's not as easily fixable. You have to sort of investigate these and try and figure out what's going on. And a category 9 is just the sort of unknown. We're not really sure what the issue is. So those are the soft bounce categories. So the key thing to remember with the soft bounce is if an email does soft bounce, and this is across all categories, the send will be reattempted 4 times across the next 24 hours. And the timings of these attempts are based on an algorithm that is impossible to predict. That could mean that the 4 attempts are done within 10 minutes and the email goes out, or the attempts are done across the full 24 hours. The main point to make there is that if you have a lot of soft bounces and these people aren't receiving emails straight away, because of this, they won't receive the emails when you schedule the send. They could receive it 10 minutes later or 24 hours later should the issue resolve, but it's another reason why bounce management is important. If you've got a whole lot of soft bounces, these people aren't necessarily receiving the email, firstly at all, and secondly, at the right time when you scheduled the send. So, all that A/B testing goodness you did to find out what time you wanted to send it may all be to waste. And whilst those reattempts are happening, the record will sit in a pending state at the email performance report level. So we can see here, this is a standard email performance report and not a program status at all. It's just a state. See, messages have been sent, but it's still in the process of being delivered or retried. Now, in terms of where bounce details are stored, these are all stored at the activity log level. So if I sent an email out to 10 people, 8 of these were delivered, 2 of them bounced. If you went to one of the 8 people that were delivered, the activity log would say email was delivered. There'd be an activity there and it would give you a bit of information about that. Similarly, a bounce has an email was bounced. It's an activity type. And if you double click on it, you can see a few sort of key pieces of information. Now, the first one I'll point out is the category. And this relates directly to that table I showed before. In this case, it was a category 2. So we know it's a hard bounce and it was due to an invalid or a non-existent email address. Below that is a subcategory. Now, this is another point that we can drill further down into figuring out what happened, why a bounce occurred. Now, Marketo's got a really long list of subcodes on the Marketo Nation community, and you can go into that if you need to. If you see a really consistent bounce because of 2003, you could find out what 2003 relates to, and you can sort of drill down further. But it is another point to look into bounces. And the third point I'll point out is the details. And this gives a bit of information about the bounce. And in this case, we know it was a category 2, and the details sort of solidifies that. It says the email account you've tried to reach does not exist. Now, one point to make about these 3 pieces of information, if we go to a smart list and we select the email was bounced, filter, trigger, whatever it is, we can add a constraint to that and actually specify these things, category, subcategory, and so on. So these are referenceable within Marketo, but they do exist at the activity log level. Now, by default, out of the box rather, Marketo does come with a few countermeasures for sort of bounce management. They've put 5 field values in to assist in managing troubled email delivery. Now, the first 3 relate to a category 1 bounce, so a hard bounce category 1, and that is email suspended, which is set to true when some types of category 1 bounces occur. The email suspended cause sort of goes into why that happened. And the email suspended at is a timestamp. Now, at the time when that's marked, 24 hours after that, emailing can resume. But those are the 3 sort of default countermeasures for a category 1 bounce. Now, for a category 2, that being invalid email, doesn't exist, we have email invalid and email invalid cause. Now, when someone does bounce in category 2, they are immediately set to true for the email invalid field. And this is important because the email invalid field actually plays into the blocked. So if you're sending a Marketo email via a smart campaign and you have 100 people in there, 10 of them are unsubscribed and 10 of them are email invalid, you will have 20 blocked emails. They cannot be sent emails or marketing emails. And the sort of big gotcha about this is this doesn't get reset by default. So if you haven't got a bounce management strategy, you haven't sort of set anything up to do with email invalid, it's likely that your category 2 bounces are probably all still stuck in email invalid. Now, why is that a problem? We can't send to them anyway. Well, if you did go ahead and change that person's details, or you change the details, then that person would still not be able to receive emails because they are marked as email invalid. It's a field that's on the record and they can't receive emails because that's still checked. And the email invalid cause is the reason for that hard bounce. So it's just another sort of details listing, and it captures that in the field. So how can we take bounce management further? Now, as a disclaimer, as is the case for most things Marketo, no one size fits all. But here are a few things that could assist in advancing your bounce management strategy. Now, first one's a bit of housekeeping. Make sure you create your Marketo program as a central Marketo program, keeping everything in the one spot for your bounce management stuff. Try and keep it together. It makes things a bit easier to manage, and it's a good starting point. And the second point is sort of the idea that you maybe you will, maybe you won't, but it's the idea to consider the need to create additional custom fields to bring bounce data outside of the activity log. Now, why would you do that? The main reason in my mind is the activity log, or activities rather, expire in Marketo. There's a time limit on them, and after a certain time, they expire. A Marketo field holds that data. Doesn't go away, it's going to stay there. So that's one of the big benefits of it in this case. And a few examples that we see quite a lot, bounce date, so sort of a date time field, email delivered after bounce. So if there was a bounce, we want a timestamp when the first email was delivered after the bounce. A few scores, how many email bounces has a record had, deliveries after bounces, and then some strings. So email bounce details, and this is sort of just saying, whenever a bounce happens, grab the details from that activity and put them in this. So we have it, we can look at it again later, and that's the same for category. Point number 3, creating a centralized static list for bounce management with sort of automated entry and exit points. And this is especially useful to have sort of a centralized place to look. You can see who's been bouncing, who's in this list, and you set up an exit point for that too. Now, the entry for this would look exactly like this one here. Email bounces is any, and email bounces soft. And I mean, it's worth mentioning now there are 2 different types here. You can specify email bounce, which is a hard bounce, and email bounce is soft, which is a soft bounce. But as soon as someone hits one of these triggers, they would then be added into this centralized list. And the exit would be as soon as someone sent an email and they're a member of this list, we've sort of now verified that person can receive comms again. Whatever the issue was, it's been resolved. So we've got an ongoing list that's being managed and updated dynamically, showing us who is actually still in this list. And it's a great starting point for seeing where things are with your bounce management. Now, other strategies we see here include smart lists for every category. Now, we've gone through the 5 categories, and you could actually create smart lists for each category. So, for example, email bounces, ad constraint, category is 1. And you create 5 smart lists for category 1, 2, and so on. And you can actually look into those. You can even subscribe to those as their smart lists and get sort of ongoing updates as to how things are going. If you've got a lot of people in your category 1, category 2, you can look at that. You can sort of try and figure out why that is the case. And number 4, which is sort of a must-have, is to do with the way Marketo plays with category 2 bounces. And that's to do with the email invalid field being set to true. So whenever a category 2 bounce occurs, Marketo marks that record as email invalid. So by default, every instance, I would recommend having this in there. And it's just making sure that if someone is email invalid and their email address is changed, there's been a change in an attempt to fix that, and email invalid is set to true, we change that email invalid to false. And it's crucial to make sure that if we are communicating to these people again, they can actually be communicated to. So this one, in my opinion, is an absolute must-have for any instance. A sort of final point about bounce management is no one size fits all, as I said before. You really need to identify your business needs and build your bounce management strategy out around these. Some businesses will need all of these strategies. Some will need very few. So don't take everything as Bible. Make sure you look at what you need and identify the problems, where issues are, and if you need really solid, whatever it is. But no one size fits all, and it's important to review what you need as a business. And that's sort of my little take on bounce management. I'm sorry we didn't go too much into Marketo. I sort of see bounce management as a bit of an onion. There's a lot of layers to it that need to be understood. But I hope that's helped a little bit. And it definitely is worth mentioning, if anyone needs any help with this sort of stuff, BPX ANZ is pretty on point with this stuff. We like bounce management strategies. We love seeing them in instances, but great deliverability rates are vital.
So we had a couple of questions when we went through. I've just answered them on the Q&A. But just to kind of revisit, Samantha asked us a great question about when do those activities expire? And the answer was that high volume activities such as email related activities tend to expire after 90 days. But other types of activities such as program status changes and things like that tend to last a lot longer. So there's a full list on the Marketo Docs website that you should become familiar with, because it's really important to know how long your data is going to stay in terms of those activity logs. So the other question I had was, will soft bounces become a hard bounce? And if so, when does that occur? Well, the criteria that feeds into a soft or a hard bounce is actually set at the server level. It won't change. So no, a soft bounce won't become a hard bounce. It won't sort of soft bounce for a while and then become a hard bounce. It will either soft bounce or hard bounce based on the reason for the bounce. So Marketo's already made that, it makes that decision and goes, okay, cool. So everything goes into pending, as Andrew mentioned, until a decision is made, and then they become soft or hard. They won't move from one to the other.
And if you are,
sorry, go for it.
If you are concerned about, the ongoing send to soft bounces, and another strategy we see used a lot is the utilization of the marketing suspended field. And some people will set it up in such a way that if anyone soft bounces 3 times, put them into the marketing suspended field. And the reason for that is marketing suspended, similar to unsubscribe and email invalid, is one of the fields under the umbrella of blocked. And so if someone does soft bounce 3 times, put them into marketing suspended and leave them there. But one thing to note there is you probably want an exit strategy for that in the case that they do fix themselves up or something happens in that. But it's another way to make sure you aren't consistently sending to soft bounce people.
Yeah, you might want to time limit that kind of strategy. So you go, okay, we've seen 3 soft bounces. We're going to push them into marketing suspended for 30 days and then come back again. So, and then bring them out into the main kind of pool after that. And if they continue to bounce, then you can look at more permanent measures. And yes, we've had the question of whether or not this recording will be available, which sounds like an awesome way to wrap up. So yes, we will be making this recording available. So if you're online now, we'll be sending it to you. If you have missed it and want to watching it on demand, thank you for coming back and checking out our webinar. But we are Blueprintx and we are out of here. Thanks for coming along and hope you have a great day.
Thanks a lot, everyone.